And I started to say no, and I was looking around for Gregory Peck, and my wife nudged me and said, "Go ahead, you can do it for him." And I was, whoosh, oh.
Clint Eastwood's love life has never been ordinary. It's been a whirlwind of marriages, affairs, and romances that kept Hollywood talking. But even for a man with such a wild and reckless history, there are 6 women he could never shake off. 6 women who left a mark so deep that even at 95, Clint admits he still can't get over them. So who are these women, and what made them impossible to forget? Join us as we reveal the 6 loves Clint Eastwood could never leave behind. Sondra Locke. If there was ever one woman Clint Eastwood could never erase from his memory, it was Sondra Locke. She was not just another chapter in his life, but an entire messy novel filled with love, betrayal, ambition, and tragedy. Their relationship carried all the elements of a classic Hollywood melodrama, the soaring highs of passion and success, and the brutal lows of manipulation, control, and heartbreak. It all began in 1972 when Locke and Eastwood crossed paths through a mutual friend, Joe Hymes. At the time, Locke was married to Gordon Anderson, her childhood best friend. Their marriage was platonic since Anderson was gay, yet the two remained legally married throughout her life. Locke auditioned for Eastwood's film Breezy, but she was turned down for being too old. The rejection, however, did not extinguish the spark between them. Just a few years later, in 1975, Eastwood cast her in The Outlaw Josie Wales, and by then, the attraction between them had already taken root. Their professional partnership blossomed quickly. Locke co-starred with Eastwood in 6 of his films, including The Gauntlet, Every Which Way But Loose, Bronco Billy, Any Which Way You Can, and Sudden Impact. In those early years, their bond seemed unshakable. Locke recalled Eastwood once telling her that he had never been faithful to a woman before because he had never truly been in love, and then half-jokingly crooning that she had made him monogamous. She believed him. She even took a pay cut for Josie Wales simply for the chance to work with him, convinced that their connection was real. They built a life together, moving through homes in Sherman Oaks, Bel Air, Northern California, and Carmel. The Bel Air mansion, which Eastwood bought for her, became her pride as she redecorated it into what she thought was their shared space. On the surface, it looked like a partnership destined to last, but beneath the surface, shadows of control and tension had already begun to form. Locke wanted more than to be Eastwood's on-screen partner. She dreamed of directing, of making her own mark in Hollywood beyond his shadow. Yet she claimed Eastwood discouraged her from working with anyone else and grew uneasy at the thought of her being too independent. Her directing projects, such as Rat Boy in 1986 and Impulse in 1990, were supported by him in name but often met with creative friction. She later revealed that Eastwood persuaded her to undergo 2 abortions and a tubal ligation because he supposedly did not want more children, though he denied coercing her and said the decisions had been hers alone. By the late 1980s, cracks in their relationship widened into chasms. Locke felt increasingly excluded, with Eastwood spending more time in Carmel while she remained in Los Angeles, growing lonelier by the day. The final breaking point came in April 1989. While she was working on Impulse, Locke returned home to find the locks on the door changed and her belongings placed in storage. Alongside this came a legal letter from Eastwood's lawyers, pointedly addressing her as Mrs. Gordon Anderson, a reminder that she was still legally married to her platonic husband. The shock was too much for her, and she fainted when she realized she had been shut out of what she believed to be their home. The fallout was brutal. Locke filed a palimony lawsuit in 1989, claiming she had endured humiliation and distress, and demanded support, property, and her share of what they had built together. A year later, the case was settled out of court. Eastwood set up a Warner Brothers development and directing deal for her worth $1.5 million, awarded her the Bel Air home, provided $450,000 in cash, and arranged monthly support. In exchange, she dropped the palimony suit. But Locke would later claim the Warner Brothers deal was a sham. She alleged that Eastwood had orchestrated it in a way that ensured her projects would never move forward, effectively silencing her under the guise of opportunity. She said every pitch she brought was turned down deliberately. In 1995, she sued him again, this time for fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. A year later, they settled once more, the details kept under wraps. The emotional and professional damage was irreparable. After Impulse, Locke's directing career never regained momentum. She drifted from Hollywood circles, losing friendships she once cherished with women like Maria Shriver and Lily Finney Zanuck. The bitterness of her relationship with Eastwood seemed to cast a permanent shadow over her ambitions. While locked in legal battles, she also fought a devastating war against breast cancer. She underwent a double mastectomy and chemotherapy, describing how the stress of her toxic relationship with Eastwood had ravaged her health. She later revealed that Eastwood never reached out to her during her illness, a silence that cut deeper than any legal fight. Locke eventually put her pain into words in her autobiography, The Good, the Bad, and the Very Ugly. In it, she admitted that her greatest regret was not leaving Eastwood sooner. She wished she had recognized the manipulation, the false promises, and the control for what they were. In hindsight, she said she could have spared herself years of suffering by cutting their story in half. Sondra Locke passed away in 2018 at the age of 74 from cardiac arrest linked to breast and bone cancer. Despite everything, she left her estate, valued at around $20 million, to Gordon Anderson, the man who had been her platonic husband and companion for life. It was a final act of loyalty, closure, in a life marked by betrayal. As for Clint Eastwood, his story moved on, but the memory of Sondra Locke remained a scar. Their love had started with promise and passion, but it unraveled into lawsuits, bitterness, and heartbreak. For all his romances, Locke was the one woman who stood apart, not because she brought him peace, but because she left behind a storm he could never quite escape. Maggie Johnson. If you want to understand the foundation of Clint Eastwood's life, the place where all the later chaos, love, and betrayal began, you have to start with Maggie Johnson. She was his first wife, the woman who quietly held together the beginnings of his fame and his family, even as he built a reputation for being impossible to contain. The story began in May 1953. Maggie was still a student at UC Berkeley, living in her sorority house, and Clint was freshly discharged from the military, still trying to figure out his path. Marriage was the last thing on his mind. A friend arranged a blind date for them in San Francisco, even though Maggie already had a boyfriend. When she came down the stairs of her sorority house and saw Clint turn around, her first thought was a simple but telling, wow. He was tall, striking, and confident. The connection was immediate, and the two began dating soon after. They hit it off quickly, but Clint was not exactly the picture of devotion. Even before he moved to Los Angeles, he was seeing other women. One of them lived in Seattle and gave birth to his first child, Lori Murray, a daughter who was placed for adoption without his knowledge. Maggie had no idea about this hidden chapter of his life when she married him in December of that same year. With Christmas lights twinkling and youthful hope still in the air, Clint Eastwood and Maggie Johnson became husband and wife just months before Lori was born. From the start, the marriage was rocky. Clint would later describe their first year together as terrible because he chafed under the restrictions of commitment. Maggie, by many accounts, tolerated more than most women ever would. Rumors of his affairs reached her, and friends recalled her once asking him directly if he was playing around. The conversations usually ended with Clint brushing off the suspicions with vague reassurances and half-truths. By 1959, the rumors had turned into something more concrete. Clint began a long and secret affair with stuntwoman Roxanne Tunis. The relationship stretched on for more than a decade, and in 1964, Roxanne gave birth to Kimber, Clint's second daughter, while he was still very much married to Maggie. For years, Kimber's existence was hidden from the public, and whether Maggie knew the full truth at the time has always been debated. What is clear is that the marriage was burdened with strain, and Maggie carried much of that weight in silence. Despite the betrayals, Clint and Maggie built a family of their own. Their son Kyle was born in 1968, and their daughter Allison arrived in 1972. They dreamed of raising their children outside the glare of Hollywood and chose Carmel by the Sea as their retreat. Clint designed and built a house there while Maggie focused on raising the children. On the surface, it was the picture-perfect family, but underneath the facade were long silences, arguments, and the knowledge that Clint's wandering eye was never far away. When Sondra Locke entered Clint's life in the mid-1970s, the fractures in his marriage with Maggie grew impossible to ignore. Their Carmel home, which had once symbolized their dreams, became a place where tension hung heavy. Maggie was forced to wrestle with the painful reality of being both wife and bystander in a marriage where Clint was slipping further away. By 1979, the marriage had reached its breaking point. Clint and Maggie separated and the divorce was finalized in 1984. The settlement was reported at $25 million, a staggering amount at the time. Yet even after the legal ties were cut, the two remained bound together by their children. Allison later described how, despite the divorce, family always came first for both parents. Maggie ensured that the children never felt torn between them, keeping Clint close enough to remain present in their lives. The hidden children, though, added another layer to Clint's story with Maggie. Lori Murray, born in February 1954 and adopted shortly after birth, did not reconnect with Clint until she was in her 30s. Kimber, born in 1964 to Roxanne Tunis, was another reminder of the double life Clint led during his marriage. Maggie's knowledge of these secrets is still unclear, but their existence adds weight to the challenges she endured as his wife. Through it all, Maggie Johnson remained quiet. She never went public with bitterness, nor did she attack Clint in the press. She focused on raising Kyle and Allison, building her own life and maintaining a complicated connection with Clint. Clint himself admitted at different times that he needed room in his marriage, a space to roam that Maggie was aware of in her own way. Whether that awareness made the marriage more bearable or more painful is impossible to know, but it shaped the entire dynamic of their years together. Maggie's patience and endurance became part of his story, even as he moved on to new relationships. For all of Clint's loves and affairs, Maggie was the constant, the foundation that anchored his early years. Her strength and dignity in the face of betrayal tell as much about Clint as they do about her. In many ways, her story is his story too. Roxanne Tunis and Jocelyn Reeves. Clint Eastwood's love life has never been simple, and two women in particular reveal just how tangled and secretive it could become. Roxanne Tunis and Jocelyn Reeves came into his life at very different times, yet both left behind children and some wild stories. The first chapter began in 1959 on the set of Rawhide. Eastwood was a rising television star, still married to Maggie Johnson, and Tunis was working as a stuntwoman and extra. She, too, was married at the time to Jack Watson Scheck Jr. Their connection was immediate, and what began as an affair grew into something far more intense than a fling. For nearly 14 years, from 1959 to 1973, Tunis remained in Clint's life. In June 1964, Roxanne gave birth to a daughter, Kimberlyn Eastwood. For years, the story remained hidden from the public, kept away like so many of Clint's secrets. He later revealed that he had not learned of Kimber's birth until a year afterward, describing the revelation as a moment that knocked the wind out of him. Though he made arrangements to help with her upbringing, their bond was not a conventional one. Clint reportedly saw Kimber only every few months, leaving Roxanne to raise her largely on her own. Despite her long connection to Eastwood, Tunis never sought the spotlight. She lived a quiet life, rarely speaking to the press about their relationship. In time, she moved to Denver, Colorado, where she embraced meditation and teaching. When she passed away in June 2023 after a brief illness, their daughter Kimber shared that Clint had been just as devastated as she was. For all the secrecy and distance, the bond between them had never fully broken. Kimber herself eventually stepped into Hollywood, though in her own way. She built a career as a makeup artist, actress, and producer, all while raising her family and carving out an identity distinct from her father's fame. As the Tunis chapter faded into the past, another began. In the mid-1980s, while Clint was still legally tied to Sondra Locke, he met Jocelyn Reeves. She was a flight attendant, and their paths crossed at Hog's Breath Inn, Clint's restaurant in Carmel by the Sea. Accounts differ on the exact timing, but many place their first encounter between 1984 and 1986. Unlike his stormy public entanglement with Locke, Clint's relationship with Reeves was conducted mostly out of view. She lived quietly, away from the cameras, raising her children without fanfare. Yet from their affair came two of Clint's most recognized children. Scott Clinton Eastwood was born on March 21, 1986. and his sister Catherine Ann followed on February 2, 1988. Though the relationship between Clint and Reeves was kept largely private, the children grew up carrying both the privilege and the burden of their father's name. Scott has spoken about his childhood, recalling being dragged to movie sets and taking odd jobs around the industry. He has always insisted that he wanted to succeed on his own terms, not by riding his father's coattails. His career in film has proven steady, with roles in both commercial blockbusters and smaller projects. Catherine, too, chose a path that led her into acting and writing. She appeared in several films, including projects connected to Clint, but has balanced her career with the weight of growing up as the daughter of one of Hollywood's most famous men and a mother who kept her distance from the public. The stories of Roxanne Tunis and Jocelyn Reeves reveal different sides of Clint Eastwood. With Tunis, there was secrecy, passion, and a hidden daughter who emerged into the world much later. With Reeves, there was a quiet, almost domestic partnership that gave him 2 children who would follow him into Hollywood. In both cases, the women remained largely private, choosing not to make their lives spectacles, even while standing in the shadow of one of the most scrutinized figures in American cinema. Frances Fisher. Clint Eastwood's personal life in the late 1980s was already a tangle of overlapping romances, but then Frances Fisher stepped in and changed the rhythm. It was 1988, and while Eastwood was still entangled with Sondra Locke and Jocelyn Reeves, Fisher appeared on the scene. She had been cast in Pink Cadillac, and though they met during production, the real spark happened at the pre-production party. Fisher arrived on roller skates, walked into the room, and locked eyes with Eastwood. She would later recall in Clint Eastwood a biography that it felt like love at first sight, as if a missing piece of the puzzle had suddenly fallen into place. They grew closer during filming, and once back in Los Angeles, they continued seeing each other. For a while, the relationship was private and discreet, almost secret. Then in late 1989, Eastwood finally ended things with Locke. The move surprised Fisher, who later admitted she had not realized how tangled his life still was. By 1992, the relationship had become public. They walked red carpets together, and Fisher described their bond as steady and serious. She said she had fun with Eastwood, though faithfulness for her was a necessary condition. That seriousness took on new meaning in August 1993, when Fisher gave birth to their daughter, Francesca Ruth Fisher Eastwood, on August 7th in Redding, California. For a short time, it seemed like Eastwood had settled into something resembling domestic bliss. He was more present, more involved, and by many accounts, that period was almost miraculous for him as a father and partner. The happiness did not last. By the end of that same year, fractures began to appear. Fisher discovered that Eastwood still had an ongoing situation with Reeves, the mother of his other children. Paparazzi then caught him kissing another woman. The betrayals cut deep. Fisher moved into the guest house as the distance between them widened. By the spring of 1995, the relationship had ended for good. Looking back, Fisher admitted that relationships often begin with attraction, but once the honeymoon phase fades, survival depends on whether 2 people can withstand the challenges. Despite the heartbreak, the 2 remained on fairly good terms and co-parented their daughter without bitter public feuds. But as Fisher drifted out of his personal life, another woman was stepping in, Dina Ruiz. While Clint Eastwood was still with Frances Fisher, fate brought another woman into his life, one who would eventually become his second wife. That woman was Dina Ruiz, a fresh-faced news anchor from Carmel by the Sea. Their paths first crossed in 1992, when Dina interviewed Clint for her station, KSBW. At the time, she was young, ambitious, and far removed from the Hollywood whirlwind that would later consume her. The exchange was professional, yet something lingered. Dina later admitted that she found Clint unexpectedly down to earth, while Clint confessed that they got along really well and even flirted a little during that first meeting. One of her colleagues joked that she was destined to marry him someday, a playful remark that would soon prove prophetic. The universe seemed intent on weaving their lives together. Not long after the interview, they found themselves at a social function in Spanish Bay. When Clint was asked if he would mind sitting next to Dina, he immediately agreed. Clint recalled how they ended up holding hands, indulging in what he described as all that kind of nonsense. It was a beginning neither of them had planned, but one that neither could resist. By early 1995, their relationship was no longer a secret. Paparazzi captured the couple kissing at a golf tournament, confirming what many had already begun to suspect. At the time, Clint was still technically involved with Frances Fisher, though their relationship was already crumbling. When the dust settled, Clint and Dina stepped fully into the light as a couple, and from there everything moved quickly. In September 1995, Clint proposed. 3 months later, in December, the pair traveled to Haley, Idaho to obtain a marriage license. But in classic Eastwood fashion, the wedding was far from traditional. In March 1996, while Dina was away on a girls' trip in Las Vegas, Clint orchestrated a surprise. Within 48 hours, he arranged an intimate ceremony at the lavish estate of his friend Steve Wynn. By the time Dina returned, she found herself swept into what she later described as her dream wedding. Their joy only deepened when Dina discovered she was pregnant shortly after the ceremony. In December 1996, they welcomed their daughter, Morgan Eastwood, who became the heart of their world. For years, Clint and Dina appeared to embody a strong, affectionate marriage. Dina often spoke glowingly of her husband in interviews, praising his humility and his respect for nature. In a 2007 interview with Carmel magazine, she described Clint as the least pretentious man she had ever met, the type who would carry bugs outside rather than kill them. She affectionately nicknamed him Saint Francis of Assisi. To the public eye, they were an unlikely yet enduring match, the legendary Hollywood star and the much younger news anchor who adored him. Dina often noted that the longest they had ever been apart was only about 10 days, a rarity in the often chaotic world of celebrity marriages. But by 2012, the cracks began to show. That year, Dina launched a reality series, Mrs. Eastwood and Company, which focused on her life with Morgan and her stepdaughter Francesca. Clint appeared only rarely, and that absence was no coincidence. Behind closed doors, he was furious about the project. Friends revealed that he felt the show betrayed his private nature and went against everything he stood for. Tension between the couple grew heavier by the day. By the summer of 2012, their marriage was unraveling. Although they still lived under the same roof, they no longer shared a bedroom. Dina, struggling with the weight of it all, leaned on an old friend for comfort, Scott Fisher, a basketball coach who had recently returned from Australia after his own divorce. Dina insisted that their relationship was nothing more than friendship, but Scott's ex-wife, Erica Fisher, did not believe it. Out of suspicion or concern, Erica reached out to Clint directly. In a stunning twist, Clint and Erica began dating by early 2013, leaving Dina blindsided. The revelation pushed Dina to take action. In September 2013, she filed for legal separation, requesting joint custody of Morgan and spousal support. A month later, she formally filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. Yet despite the heartbreak, Dina never allowed bitterness to define her. She defended Clint publicly, urging fans not to speak ill of him. On Twitter, she called him a wonderful, good-natured, brilliant person. Even during an appearance on Bethany Frankel's talk show, Dina chose grace over resentment. She explained that Clint himself had not wronged her, but rather that the people around him had caused much of the pain. She described Clint as the sweetest, most loving, low-key person, and admitted that her instincts had been right when she believed she was marrying a good man, even if the marriage itself did not last. The divorce was finalized and both moved on with their lives. In July 2016, Dina found love again when she married Scott Fisher in Santa Barbara, officially closing the chapter on her years with Clint. What began with flirtatious glances and a surprise wedding had unraveled into reality television drama and shocking entanglements. Yet in the end, Dina's respect for Clint remained unshaken. Even in heartbreak, she acknowledged the humanity of the man the world saw as a larger-than-life Hollywood icon, Christina Sandera. By the time Clint Eastwood crossed paths with Christina Sandera, he had already lived through enough love stories to fill a dozen Hollywood scripts. Yet this chapter felt different. Christina wasn't a starlet chasing fame or a co-star swept up in one of Eastwood's movies. She was a hostess at his beloved Mission Ranch Hotel, a property he had poured millions into after buying it in 1986. Eastwood had restored the ranch into a dreamy coastal retreat in Carmel, but he admitted he wasn't the type to play the glad-handing owner. In his own words, he wasn't the jolly host type. That made it all the more surprising when a spark lit between him and Christina. For Clint, who was nearing his mid-80s when they met, this wasn't about scandal, paparazzi frenzy, or the stormy affairs that had defined much of his past. This was about comfort, companionship, and something steady. Christina, grounded in private, wasn't dazzled by his fame. She slipped seamlessly into his low-key world in Carmel by the Sea, the small town where Clint once served as mayor. And together they built a life that was more about home-cooked meals and ocean sunsets than Hollywood premieres. Still, when the moment called for it, she was right by his side. Their first big public outing came in 2015, when Clint brought Christina as his date to the Academy Awards. His film American Sniper was up for 6 Oscars, including Best Picture, but all eyes were on the legendary director with the woman no one had expected. The two had already been spotted the year before, photographed casually grocery shopping, proof that Eastwood's new romance wasn't a fleeting fling but something real. Over the years, Christina became a quiet but constant presence at his side. In 2016, she joined him at a special screening of Sully at the Directors Guild of America, standing next to him as he proudly unveiled another piece of his legacy. The following year, they walked hand in hand at the Cannes Film Festival, a rare display of Eastwood's private life on one of the world's grandest stages. Perhaps what stood out most was how Christina fit into Clint's famously complicated family. The Eastwood clan is large, with children from multiple relationships, exes who still remain in the picture, and a history of tangled romances. Yet Christina seemed to be welcomed in without fuss. In 2018, she appeared at the premiere of Clint's film The Mule, standing with not only Clint's children and granddaughter, but also his first wife, Maggie Johnson. To see them all together, side by side, spoke volumes. By 2020, as Clint approached his 90th birthday, the Eastwood family planned something simple, a low-key celebration. Scott Eastwood revealed that the plan was to keep things mellow, just a family gathering with a cake snuck in despite Clint's dislike of birthdays. That alone painted the picture of the man he had become, an icon who could still command an audience of millions, but who found his greatest joy in the calm of family and the company of a woman who asked for nothing more than his time. Unfortunately, in July 2024, Sandera died at the age of 61. Christina Sandera may not have the tabloid-heavy history of Clint's other loves, but in many ways, that's what makes her so unforgettable in his story. What name on the list shocked you the most? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also click the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.